The backyard buzzed with the kind of forced southern charm that made Levi's jaw tight. 55 guests milled around Marlene Bridger's retirement party, their voices mixing with the humid Charleston air. He stood near the drink table, watching his 12-year-old daughter Willow navigate through the crowd with the careful precision she used for everything. Levi Granger had learned to read a room the way he read automation systems methodically, looking for the weak points before they failed. At 42, his engineering mind cataloged details others missed. The way Marlene's smile never reached her eyes when she looked at Willow. How his wife Taryn's laugh got sharper when she did whine. The exact distance Fiona kept from her mother while still staying within earshot. "Daddy, can I get some punch?" Willow asked, appearing at his elbow. Her dark hair was pulled back in the way Taryn insisted. Neat, controlled, nothing like the wild curls Willow preferred. "Of course, sweetheart." He handed her a glass, noting how she held it with both hands. Willow approached the world like it might break if she wasn't careful enough. The music shifted to something jazzy and pretentious. Marlene had positioned herself near the dessert table, holding court in her cream-colored dress that probably cost more than most people's mortgage payments. She gestured with her wine glass as she spoke, the liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. "And I said to the mayor's wife, you simply cannot serve store-bought appetizers at a charity function." The reputation of the entire organization was at stake. Levi watched Taryn nod along from her spot on the wicker settee, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the humidity. She sipped her wine with practiced elegance, every movement calculated for maximum effect. This was her element, the performance of being someone important. Willow moved toward the dessert table, drawn by the elaborate cake Marlene had ordered. 3 tiers of vanilla and raspberry, decorated with delicate sugar flowers that probably took hours to create. His daughter loved beautiful things, especially when they involved intricate details she could study. "Be careful around grandmother's cake, Willow," Taryn called out, her voice carrying that edge it got when other people were watching. "You know how clumsy you can be." Levi's fingers tightened around his glass. Willow wasn't clumsy, she was deliberate. Every movement she made served a purpose, even if others couldn't see the logic. Willow nodded and stepped closer to admire the cake's construction. The dessert table had been arranged with military precision crystal serving dishes, silver utensils, cloth napkins folded into perfect triangles. Marlene's designer shoes clicked against the brick patio as she moved to intercept his daughter. "Don't touch anything, child. These are my good serving pieces." "I won't, grandmother. I'm just looking." But as Willow leaned in to see the intricate piping work on the cake's middle tier, her elbow caught the edge of the adjacent wine table. The impact was minimal, barely a bump, but it was enough to send a glass of red wine sliding across the white tablecloth. Time seemed to slow as Levi watched the glass tip and fall. The wine arced through the air in a perfect parabola, splashing across Marlene's cream-colored shoes and the brick patio below. The music stopped. Conversations died mid-sentence. 55 faces turned toward the dessert table where Willow stood frozen, her eyes wide with the kind of panic that came from knowing she'd made a mistake in front of people who were already looking for reasons to criticize her. Marlene stared down at her ruined shoes, probably designer, probably expensive, definitely chosen specifically for this party. The red wine had stained the cream leather in irregular splotches that looked like abstract art. "Look what you've done." Marlene's voice was quiet, deadly. "Look what you've done to my shoes." "I'm sorry, grandmother. I didn't mean." The slap came without warning, that Marlene's palm connected with Willow's cheek with enough force to knock the girl sideways. The sound echoed across the suddenly silent patio like a gunshot. Willow stumbled, catching herself against the table. Her hand flew to her cheek, which was already showing the red outline of Marlene's palm. But she didn't cry. Levi's daughter had learned early that tears only made things worse in this family. The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. 4, 5, then Fiona started clapping, slow, deliberate applause that cut through the quiet like broken glass. Her hands came together in a mockingly rhythmic pattern while she smiled with vicious satisfaction. "Well done, mother. Really showed her who's boss." Taryn lifted her wine glass to her lips, took a sip, and looked directly at her daughter. Her expression held no warmth, no concern, no maternal instinct at all. "Serves you right, Willow." Levi set his glass down on the nearest table with mechanical precision. He walked across the patio, his footsteps the only sound in the backyard full of people. He knelt beside his daughter, close enough to see the tears she was fighting to hold back. "Are you hurt?" His voice was quiet, controlled. Willow shook her head, but he could see the tremor in her hands. Could see the way she was trying to make herself smaller, invisible. Levi stood and looked at the three women who had just destroyed something precious. His wife sat with her wine glass balanced on her knee, completely unbothered. His mother-in-law smoothed down her dress as if nothing had happened. Fiona had stopped clapping, but still wore that cruel smile and yelling. No rage, just calculated stillness while he memorized this moment, every face, every reaction, every person who had chosen to watch a child get struck and done nothing. "Come on, sweetheart." He placed his hand gently on Willow's shoulder. "Let's get you cleaned up." They walked through the crowd of silent guests toward the house. No one spoke. No one offered help. No one apologized. Later that night, Levi stood in his garage workshop, surrounded by the orderly chaos of his projects. Circuit boards and automation components lined the shelves in precise rows. His workbench held half-finished prototypes for clients who trusted his methodical approach to complex problems. The house was quiet. Taryn had gone to bed without speaking to him. Willow was in her room, probably drawing. It was how she processed difficult emotions. No one had apologized. Not his wife, not his mother-in-law, not even his sister-in-law, who had turned a moment of pain into entertainment. He unlocked his laptop and opened an encrypted folder he'd been maintaining for months. Documentation, photos, financial records, a careful catalog of every slight, every cruel comment, every moment when his family had chosen cruelty over kindness. Tonight had provided the final piece. He dialed the first number. "Lena Poe's office. This is the answering service. This is Levi Granger. I need to schedule an emergency consultation with Ms. Poe regarding custody and divorce proceedings. Tomorrow, if possible. I'll have her call you first thing in the morning, Mr. Granger." The second call went to a tip line he'd researched but never used. "Child Protective Services, how can I help you? I need to report physical abuse of a minor. The child was struck by her grandmother in front of witnesses. I have video evidence. Can you provide the child's name and current location? Willow Granger. She's safe with me now, but I need to document this incident officially." The third call was to Will Jeffers, a forensic accountant he'd worked with on corporate automation projects. "Will, it's Levi Granger. I need your help with something personal. Asset protection and financial documentation for divorce proceedings." "Jesus, Levi. I'm sorry to hear that. When do you need this done?" "Yesterday." After he hung up, Levi stood in the silence of his workshop. Tools hung in perfect order on pegboard walls. His projects waited in various stages of completion, each one a problem that could be solved with patience and precision. He thought about the faces in that backyard. 55 people who had watched a child get struck and said nothing. His wife, who had blamed their daughter for being hurt. His mother-in-law, who had used violence to solve a minor accident. His sister-in-law, who had celebrated the cruelty. They thought he was weak. Passive. Someone who would absorb their poison and ask for more. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The memories came in fragments during the quiet moments, breakfast conversations that turned into criticisms, car rides filled with passive-aggressive comments, therapy sessions where he'd learned words for things he'd always felt but never named. 3 months earlier, during one of Willow's appointments with her therapist, Nora Wynn had used a phrase that stuck with him: emotional abuse. Willow shows signs of hypervigilance around authority figures, Nora had explained after the session. She's constantly scanning for signs of disapproval or anger. That's not normal for a child her age. What causes that? Usually, it develops when a child lives in an environment where criticism and rejection are unpredictable but frequent. They learn to watch for warning signs to protect themselves. Levi had thought about Taryn's parenting style, the way she treated Willow, like a project that needed fixing instead of a child who needed support. how she'd criticize Willow's interests, her way of organizing her room, even the way she moved through the world. "She's just so weird, Levi," Taryn had said one morning after Willow had spent an hour arranging her art supplies by color gradient. "Normal kids don't do things like that. She's organizing her materials. It helps her focus. It's obsessive. She needs to learn to be more flexible." But flexibility, in Taryn's world, meant conforming to standards that changed without warning. Be more social, but not too loud. Be creative, but not in ways that embarrass the family. Be smart, but not so smart that it made other people uncomfortable. Marlene had been even more direct in her disapproval. "That child needs structure," she'd announced during one of her visits. "All this art nonsense is just encouraging her to be even more antisocial. She should be in activities with other children, learning proper social skills. She's in art classes with other children. Normal activities. Dance classes. Etiquette lessons. Things that will help her fit in better." Levi had watched his daughter's face during these conversations. Willow had learned to go very still when the adults discussed her, as if she wasn't in the room. Her expression would become carefully neutral, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands would fidget with whatever she was holding. The breaking point had come 6 weeks ago, during a family dinner at Marlene's house. "I found a wonderful program for children with Willow's challenges," Marlene had announced over dessert. "It's a residential behavioral modification camp in Tennessee. They specialize in helping children learn appropriate social responses." "What kind of program?" Levi had asked. "They work with children who have difficulty integrating into normal social situations. The results are quite impressive. Most children come home much more compliant and better able to function in regular environments." Levi had researched the place that night. Behavioral modification, compliance training, conversion therapy disguised as social skills training. The kind of place that took children who thought differently and tried to force them into predetermined molds. "Absolutely not. Levi, be reasonable," Taryn had said. "Willow clearly needs more help than we can give her at home. This could be exactly what she needs to become more normal." "She doesn't need to become more normal. She needs to be supported for who she is." "Who she is isn't working, Levi. Look at her. She has no friends. She spends all her time alone with her art projects. She can barely handle basic social situations without having a meltdown. She handles social situations fine when people aren't constantly criticizing her for being herself." That argument had lasted until 2 in the morning. Taryn had accused him of enabling Willow's problems. Marlene had called him the next day to explain how his permissive parenting was damaging their granddaughter's future. Even Fiona had weighed in, suggesting that Levi's emotional attachment to Willow was preventing him from making rational decisions about her care. They all agreed that Willow was the problem, that her differences were defects to be corrected rather than traits to be understood and supported. None of them had bothered to ask Willow what she wanted, as Levi had asked her one evening while she worked on a detailed drawing of their garden. "How do you feel when grandmother and mommy talk about changing you?" Willow had looked up from her sketch pad, considering the question with the same careful attention she gave everything else. "Like I'm broken." "You're not broken, sweetheart. Then why do they want to fix me all the time?" Levi had knelt beside her chair, looking at the drawing she'd been working on. Every leaf was rendered in perfect detail, each flower petal shaded with subtle gradations of color. It was the work of someone who saw beauty in complexity, who found meaning in details others overlooked. Because they don't understand that different doesn't mean wrong. Will you let them send me to that place? Never. That was when he'd started planning. Quietly, methodically, building a case for custody that would protect his daughter from people who saw her as a problem to be solved instead of a person to be loved. 1 week after the party, Levi walked into Willow's school, carrying a manila folder thick with documentation. The hallways smelled like cleaning supplies and childhood, a combination of hope and institutional efficiency that reminded him why he'd chosen this particular private school. The administrative office was decorated with student artwork and achievement certificates. Mrs. Rodriguez, the school's secretary, looked up from her computer with professional warmth. "Mr. Granger, good to see you. How can I help you today? I need to update Willow's student file with some important documentation. Is Dr. Martinez available?" Dr. Martinez, the school principal, was a woman in her 50s who had built her reputation on creating safe spaces for children who didn't fit traditional educational molds. She'd been the one to suggest testing Willow for autism spectrum disorder, and she'd supported the accommodations that helped his daughter thrive academically. Of course, come in. Her office was warm and inviting, with comfortable chairs and walls lined with books about child development and educational philosophy. Levi took the chair across from her desk and opened the folder. I need to formally document an incident of physical abuse involving Willow. Dr. Martinez's expression shifted to careful attention. Tell me what happened. Levi walked her through the events at Marlene's party, the spilled wine, the slap, the reactions of the other family members. He pulled out printed copies of the photographer's raw footage, witness statements from 2 guests who'd been uncomfortable enough to contact him afterward, and photos of the bruise on Willow's cheek taken the next morning. This is concerning, Mr. Granger. What actions are you taking? I filed a report with Child Protective Services, and I'm pursuing legal custody modifications. But I need the school to be aware that Marlene Bridger is no longer authorized to have any contact with Willow during school hours. She's not to pick her up, visit her, or have any access to her educational records. I'll update her file immediately. Is there anything else we should know? Taryn may try to enroll Willow in a behavioral modification program against my wishes. I have sole decision-making authority regarding her education and therapy, and I want that clearly documented in her file. Dr. Martinez made notes in Willow's record while they spoke. She'd seen enough troubled family situations to recognize the signs of a custody battle forming. How is Willow handling all of this? She's resilient, but she's also relieved to know that someone is finally protecting her from family members who see her differences as problems to be fixed. After leaving the school, Levi drove across town to meet with Nora Wynn, Willow's therapist. Her office was in a converted Victorian house with soft lighting and comfortable furniture designed to put children at ease. I'm updating my clinical assessment based on the incident you described, Nora said, reviewing her notes. Willow's been exhibiting signs of trauma response hypervigilance, emotional withdrawal, fear of making mistakes. The physical violence she experienced is consistent with the emotional abuse patterns we've been addressing. Can you document that in her file? I'm preparing a comprehensive report for the court proceedings. It will include my professional opinion that continued contact with the family members who participated in or endorsed the abuse would be detrimental to Willow's mental health and development. Meanwhile, at home, Taryn was discovering that certain conveniences had disappeared from her life. The joint checking account that paid for her personal expenses had been frozen for security verification. The credit cards linked to Levi's accounts were declined when she tried to use them at her regular shopping destinations. Even the automatic payments for her gym membership and subscription services had been suspended. "What's going on with our accounts?" she asked that evening, finding Levi in his workshop. He looked up from the circuit board he was soldering, his expression calm and unreadable. "I'm reviewing our financial structure for security purposes. Everything should be resolved soon." "Resolve how?" "I couldn't even pay for lunch today." "Use your personal account." "My personal account has maybe $300 in it. All our regular expenses come out of the joint accounts. Then you'll need to transfer some money from your savings." Taryn stared at him as if he'd suggested she build a rocket ship. Her personal savings account contained approximately $47. She'd never seen the need to maintain separate finances when Levi's engineering salary covered everything. "This is ridiculous, Levi. Just call the bank and fix whatever's wrong." "Nothing's wrong. I'm just being more careful about our financial security." Over the next few days, Taryn noticed other changes. Levi worked later than usual, but he wasn't talking about his projects the way he normally did. He'd become quieter, more focused, as if he was concentrating on something that required all his attention. The change became impossible to ignore during Friday night dinner at Marlene's house, a weekly tradition that Levi had tolerated for the sake of family peace. Marlene had prepared her usual elaborate meal, complete with multiple courses and formal place settings. She held court at the head of the table, discussing her retirement plans and the various social obligations that would fill her newly available time. I've been thinking about Willow's summer schedule, she announced over the main course. There's a wonderful etiquette camp in Virginia that would be perfect for her. 3 weeks of intensive social skills, training with other children from good families. Levi continued, cutting his steak with methodical precision. Willow won't be attending any camps this summer. Don't be ridiculous, Levi. The child needs structure and social interaction with appropriate peers. She gets plenty of social interaction through her art classes and her school friends. Fiona laughed from her spot across the table. You mean those other weird kids she hangs around with? That's not exactly preparing her for the real world. The real world needs people who think differently. Not everyone has to fit the same mold. Marlene set down her fork with a kind of deliberate control that signaled an approaching lecture. Levi, I've been patient with your approach to parenting. But Willow is clearly struggling with basic social skills. She needs professional intervention to help her learn appropriate behaviors. She needs family members who accept her as she is instead of constantly trying to change her. We're trying to help her become a functional member of society. You're trying to break her spirit so she'll be easier to control. The silence that followed was charged with 13 years of accumulated tension. Marlene's face flushed with indignation. Taryn looked between her husband and her mother as if watching a tennis match. I think, Marlene said carefully, that you're too emotionally invested in this situation to make rational decisions about what's best for Willow. Levi placed his knife and fork on his plate with precise parallel alignment. He looked directly at his mother-in-law, his expression completely calm. You won't be seeing her outside of supervised visits. The laughter came from all 3 women at once, surprised, dismissive, as if he'd told a joke they didn't understand. Don't be dramatic, Levi, Terrence said. You can't just decide that we can't see Willow. Actually, I can. And I have. Fiona leaned forward with the predatory interest of someone who sensed weakness. You think you're in charge here? You think you can just cut us out of our life because you disagree with our methods? Levi stood up from the table, his movements controlled and deliberate. He looked at each of them in turn, his wife, his mother-in-law, his sister-in-law, cataloging their expressions of dismissive amusement. You think I'm bluffing? We know you're bluffing, Marlene said. You don't have a backbone to follow through on threats like that. Levi walked to the front door, retrieved his jacket from the hall closet, and returned to the dining room, where the 3 women were still sitting at the table, watching him with varying degrees of smugness. You struck my daughter. That was your first mistake. He looked directly at each of them. Your second was thinking I wouldn't do anything about it. The automatic payment notifications started arriving on Tuesday morning. Taryn stared at her phone screen in the kitchen, reading the same message 3 times before the words registered. Payment failed, insufficient funds. The mortgage company, followed by the electric company, then the private school that charged more per semester than most people earned in 6 months. Levi, she called toward his workshop. Something's wrong with the bank accounts. He emerged from the garage, wiping his hands on a clean rag, his expression neutral as Switzerland. What kind of wrong? All the automatic payments are bouncing. The mortgage, utilities, Willow's tuition, everything. He examined the notifications on her phone with the same careful attention he gave malfunctioning equipment. That is concerning. Concerning? Levi, this is our house. Our electricity. Our daughter's education. Actually, he said, handing back her phone, it's my house. My utilities. My daughter's education. The words hit her like cold water. Taryn had never paid attention to whose name appeared on what documents. Levi handled all the financial details while she focused on the social aspects of their life. Bank accounts, mortgages, insurance policies, they were just boring paperwork that appeared and disappeared without requiring her input. Don't be ridiculous. We're married. Everything is shared. Community property laws vary by state and situation. Levi's voice held the same tone he used when explaining technical concepts to clients. South Carolina follows equitable distribution principles, but certain assets remain separate property regardless of marital status. What are you talking about? The house was purchased before our marriage with funds from my inheritance. It was never legally converted to joint ownership. The utilities are in my name. Willow's school account is funded through my business checking account. Taryn felt something cold spreading through her chest. You're cutting off our money because you're angry about the party? I'm not angry. I'm being strategic. Strategic about what? But Levi had already returned to his workshop, leaving her alone with a phone full of failed payment notifications and the growing realization that her comfortable life had been built on foundations she'd never bothered to examine. WY Thursday. The consequences were impossible to ignore. The electricity had been shut off for non-payment, leaving the house dark and quiet. The water company had sent a final notice. Even the garbage pickup service had been suspended. Marlene arrived unannounced that afternoon, her Mercedes purring in the driveway like an expensive cat. She let herself in through the front door. She'd never bothered to knock at her daughter's house, and found Taryn sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by unpaid bills. What on earth is going on here? The electricity is off. Levi's lost his mind. He stopped paying for everything. Marlene's eyes narrowed with the calculating expression she wore when solving problems that threatened her family's reputation. Where is he? At work. He leaves early and comes home late, barely speaks to me, acts like nothing's wrong. And Willow, at school. Thank God that's still paid up, at least for now. Marlene pulled out her phone and dialed her bank. I'll transfer some money to cover the utilities. We can't have neighbors seeing this house. Without power, it reflects poorly on all of us. But when she tried to access Taryn's account information, she discovered another problem. The joint account she'd been using to help with household expenses had been closed. The credit card she'd co-signed for emergencies had been canceled. Even the small checking account she'd set up years ago to give Taryn independence had been frozen pending fraud investigation. He's locked me out of everything, Taryn said, watching her mother's face cycle through confusion, anger, and something that might have been fear. I can't access any money except my personal savings account. How much is in there? $47. The silence that followed was filled with the sound of their lives unraveling. Marlene had built her entire social identity around being the family matriarch who solved problems with money and connections. Taryn had built hers around being the successful engineer's wife who never had to worry about mundane details like paying bills. Neither of them had prepared for a scenario where Levi simply stopped playing by their rules. We'll get lawyers, Marlene said finally. He can't just cut off his own family. With what money? You just said all the accounts are frozen. I have my own resources. Do you? Because I tried to use the credit card you gave me for emergencies, and it was declined. Marlene's face went very still. She pulled out her phone and called her personal bank, the one she'd used for 40 years, where the managers knew her by name and treated her like visiting royalty. This is Marlene Bridger. I need to check the status of my personal checking account. What do you mean there's a hold on the account? An IRS audit requires what kind of documentation? No, I haven't received any notices. She hung up with the careful control of someone trying not to break expensive things. What's happening? Taryn asked. It seems there are questions about some charitable deductions I claimed last year. The bank has frozen the account pending resolution. What Marlene didn't mention was the anonymous tip that had prompted the audit, a detailed report suggesting that her charitable foundation had been claiming deductions for personal expenses and political contributions. The kind of tip that required intimate knowledge of her financial records and filing practices. The kind of tip that might come from someone with access to forensic accounting services. Lena Poe's law office occupied the third floor of a converted historic building downtown, where exposed brick walls and modern technology created an atmosphere of timeless competence. She was a woman in her mid-50s who had built her reputation defending parents in custody battles against wealthy, well-connected opponents. I've reviewed all the documentation you provided, she said, gesturing to the thick folders spread across her conference table. You've been thorough. Levi sat across from her, watching as she organized the evidence he'd been collecting for months. School records showing Willow's academic success. Therapy reports documenting emotional abuse. Financial statements proving his ability to provide stable support. Character references from teachers, neighbors, and colleagues. The video footage from the party is particularly compelling, Lena continued. Physical violence against a child in front of witnesses creates a strong foundation for protective orders. What about custody? Given the evidence of abuse and the fact that you've been the primary caretaker, I'm confident we can secure temporary sole custody. The question is whether we can make it permanent. What would that require? We need to demonstrate a pattern of behavior that puts Willow at risk. The slapping incident is serious, but family courts prefer to see multiple instances of concerning behavior rather than isolated events. Levi opened another folder, this one containing printed emails, text messages, and recorded phone conversations. Months of documentation showing Taryn's dismissive attitude toward their daughter's needs, Marlene's attempts to undermine his parenting decisions, and Fiona's cruel comments about Willow's differences. How did you obtain all this? South Carolina is a one-party consent state for recording conversations. The emails and texts were sent to my personal accounts. The financial records are from accounts I opened and maintained independently. Lena smiled with the satisfaction of a professional who appreciated thorough preparation. You've been planning this for a while. Since Willow was diagnosed with autism and they started talking about fixing her. Let's talk strategy. We'll file for emergency temporary custody based on the physical abuse incident. Simultaneously, we'll request protective orders preventing Marlene from having unsupervised contact with Willow. We'll also petition for exclusive use of the marital residence during proceedings. The house isn't marital property. I purchased it before the marriage with inheritance funds. Even better, that eliminates one potential complication. They spent the next 2 hours crafting legal documents that would reshape his family's entire structure. Custody petitions, restraining orders, financial disclosures. Each form was a tool designed to protect his daughter from people who saw her differences as defects. The photographer who had covered Marlene's retirement party was a freelancer named David Shun who specialized in corporate events and family celebrations. His contract included a standard clause about providing raw footage to clients upon request, though most people were satisfied with the edited highlights. Levi wasn't most people. I need all the unedited footage from the Bridger party last week, he said, meeting David at a coffee shop near the photographer's studio. Everything you shot, in chronological order. That's a lot of footage. Most people just want the highlights. I'm not most people. David handed over a hard drive containing 6 hours of raw video files. Can I ask why you need all this? Documentation purposes. The footage was exactly what Levi had hoped for. Multiple camera angles of the wine spilling incident, the slap, Fiona's applause, and Taryn's cruel comment. But more importantly, it captured the reactions of the 55 guests who had witnessed the abuse and done nothing. Some looked uncomfortable. Others seemed embarrassed. A few appeared shocked by Marlene's violence. But none of them had intervened. None of them had spoken up for a 12-year-old child who had been struck for an accident. Levi edited the footage down to a 3-minute compilation that told the story with devastating clarity. Willow's innocent mistake. Marlene's violent overreaction. The family's cruel celebration of a child's pain. The complicit silence of everyone who watched it happen, that he uploaded the video to an anonymous account on multiple social media platforms, using privacy settings that made it impossible to trace back to him. Then he sent links to local news outlets, child advocacy organizations, and several prominent family law attorneys in the Charleston area. The video went viral within 48 hours. The first sign that something had changed came when Marlene's hairdresser canceled her standing weekly appointment. I'm sorry, Mrs. Bridger, but we're booked solid for the next few months, the receptionist said, her voice carrying the kind of artificial sweetness that meant trouble. Perhaps you could try the salon on Meeting Street. The salon on Meeting Street was where middle-class women went for basic cuts and colors. It was absolutely not where Marlene Bridger had her hair done. This is ridiculous. I've been coming here for 15 years. I understand your frustration, but our schedule is completely full. Marlene hung up and immediately called the country club to confirm her luncheon reservation for Thursday. The hostess put her on hold for an unusually long time before returning with apologetic regret. I'm afraid there's been a mix-up with the reservations, Mrs. Bridger. That table has already been assigned to another party. Then give me a different table. Unfortunately, we're completely booked for the next several weeks. By Wednesday, Marlene understood that something systematic was happening. Her tennis partner had canceled their weekly game due to scheduling conflicts. The ladies' auxiliary meeting she was supposed to host had been mysteriously moved to another member's home. Even her longtime friend, Eleanor Morrison, had been unusually brief during their phone conversation. "Have you seen that video, Marlene?" Eleanor had asked, her voice tight with disapproval. "What video?" "The one from your retirement party. It's all over Facebook. People are talking." Marlene found the video that evening, sitting alone in her darkened living room with her laptop balanced on her knees. Watching herself slap Willow was bad enough. Seeing Fiona's mocking applause and Taryn's cruel comment made it worse. But the real horror was watching the reactions of her carefully cultivated social circle. People she'd considered friends looked disgusted. Neighbors she'd known for decades appeared shocked and uncomfortable. Even the pastor from her church seemed visibly disturbed by what he'd witnessed. The video had been shared hundreds of times, with comments that ranged from outrage to heartbroken. Someone had identified her by name, along with Taryn and Fiona. Their social media profiles were being flooded with criticism from strangers who had watched a grandmother strike her grandchild and found it unforgivable. While Marlene was discovering the consequences of viral infamy, Taryn was dealing with more immediate problems. The electricity had been restored after Marlene managed to pay the bill, but other services remained suspended. The garbage was piling up. The water pressure was sporadic. Even the internet service was threatened with disconnection. "I don't understand how this happened so fast," she told Fiona during an emergency meeting at her sister's apartment. "1 week ago, everything was normal. Now I can't even pay for groceries. It's Levi. He's been planning this." "Planning what?" "To destroy his own family. To punish us for not accepting his precious daughter exactly as she is." Fiona's apartment was smaller than Taryn was used to, filled with the kind of furniture that came from discount stores rather than interior decorators. It was a reminder that not everyone in their family had married well, and that financial security was more fragile than it appeared. "We need to fight back," Fiona said. "Get lawyers. Contest whatever he's doing in court. Make him pay for trying to control us." "With what money?" "Everything I had access to was connected to his accounts." "I'll help. My campaign has some discretionary funds we can use." But Fiona's confidence was about to suffer its own devastating blow. The envelope arrived at her campaign office on Friday morning, delivered by courier with the city's official seal. Inside was a formal notice of investigation by the Municipal Ethics Commission, along with a thick folder of financial documents that detailed every questionable expenditure her campaign had made over the past 2 years. Campaign funds used for personal dinners with donors. City resources deployed for private events. Contract awarded to companies owned by family friends without proper bidding processes. Even the mysterious cash payments she'd made to help Marlene with various charitable projects. All of it documented with receipts, bank records, and email evidence that suggested someone with intimate knowledge of local government operations had spent months building a case against her. How did they get all this information? She demanded of her campaign manager, a nervous young man who had been hired more for his political connections than his competence. It came from a Freedom of Information Act request. Someone requested all financial records related to your office and campaign activities. Who requested it? The request was filed anonymously through a legal firm in Colombia. They followed all proper procedures, so we had to comply. Fiona stared at the documents spread across her desk, seeing years of careful political maneuvering about to collapse in a scandal and criminal investigation. Her dreams of higher office were evaporating in real time, replaced by the very real possibility of legal consequences. "This is Levi," she said. "Somehow this is Levi." Her campaign manager looked confused. "Your brother-in-law? The engineer? How would he know about any of this?" Fiona didn't answer, but she was thinking about automation systems, about data analysis, about the kind of methodical problem-solving that could untangle complex networks of financial relationships and present them in devastating clarity. She was thinking about a man who had spent years quietly observing his family's behavior while they dismissed him as weak and passive. A man who apparently understood exactly how much damage patient, precise investigation could inflict on people who had been careless with their secrets. The phone rang. Her caller ID showed Taryn's number. "Have you seen the custody paperwork?" Taryn's voice was shaking. What custody paperwork? Levi filed for emergency custody. There's going to be a hearing next week. He's trying to take Willow away from me. Fiona looked at the ethics investigation documents, then at her phone, displaying her sister's panic. Levi's not trying to take Willow away from you, she said slowly. He's taking her away from all of us. The Charleston County Family Court building was a monument to bureaucratic efficiency, all glass and steel designed to process human tragedy with maximum throughput. Levi arrived 30 minutes early, carrying a leather briefcase that contained 2 years of careful documentation. Lena, Poe met in the lobby, her expression professionally confident, but not overconfident. She'd handled enough custody cases to know that family court judges had seen every variation of human cruelty and weren't easily impressed by preparation alone. "How are you feeling?" she asked as they walked toward the elevators. "Ready. The other side will try to paint you as vindictive. A father using his daughter to punish his wife for marital problems. You need to stay calm no matter what they say." Levi adjusted his tie navy blue, conservative, the kind worn by reliable men who paid their taxes and coached Little League. "They can paint me however they want. The evidence speaks for itself." Courtroom 3B was smaller than he'd expected, with wood-paneled walls and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly jaundiced. Judge Patricia Hendricks presided from behind a raised bench, her gray hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun that suggested she'd heard every excuse and sob story imaginable. Taryn sat at the defendant's table with a court-appointed attorney who looked fresh out of law school. She dressed carefully modest skirt, conservative blouse, minimal jewelry, the costume of a concerned mother fighting for her child. Marlene sat directly behind her in the gallery, wearing an expression of wounded dignity that suggested she was the victim of some terrible misunderstanding. Fiona was notably absent. Her ethics investigation had progressed to criminal charges, and her attorney had advised against appearing in any legal proceedings that might generate additional scrutiny. "This is a hearing for emergency temporary custody," Judge Hendricks announced. "Mr. Granger, your attorney may present evidence supporting the petition." Lena stood and approached the bench with the practiced confidence of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. "Your Honor, we're requesting immediate sole custody of the minor child Willow Granger based on documented physical and emotional abuse by family members. We have video evidence, witness statements, and professional assessments that demonstrate the child is in immediate danger if she remains in her current environment." She activated a laptop connected to the courtroom's display system. The retirement party video began playing on a large screen visible to everyone in the room. Levi watched the judge's face as the footage showed Willow's accidental wine spill, followed by Marlene's violent slap. He saw the exact moment when Judge Hendricks' professional neutrality shifted to barely controlled anger. It was when Fiona began her mocking applause. The video played Taryn's cruel comment, "Serves you right, Willow." Then it showed the faces of 55 guests who had watched a child be struck and done nothing. The defendant struck the child with sufficient force to leave visible bruising. Lena continued, displaying photos taken the morning after the party. This was witnessed by multiple adults who did nothing to intervene or protect the child. Taryn's attorney stood to object. "Your Honor, this was an isolated incident, a moment of poor judgment during a stressful family gathering. It doesn't represent a pattern of abuse." "Actually, it does," Lena replied, opening another folder. "We have documentation of systematic emotional abuse spanning several years." She presented transcripts of therapy sessions where Willow had described feeling broken and wrong because of her family's constant criticism. School records showing declining confidence and increasing anxiety. Audio recordings of family conversations where Marlene and Taryn discussed sending Willow to behavioral modification programs designed to suppress her autistic traits. The child has been repeatedly told that her neurological differences are defects to be corrected rather than traits to be supported. This has resulted in documented trauma responses, including hypervigilance, emotional withdrawal, and fear of making mistakes. Nora Wynn, Willow's therapist, took the witness stand wearing the kind of professional attire that suggested competence without intimidation. In my professional opinion, she testified, continued exposure to family members who view her autism as a problem to be solved would be detrimental to Willow's mental health and development. She's shown significant improvement in environments where her differences are accepted and supported. What kind of improvement? Judge Hendricks asked. Reduced anxiety, increased social engagement, improved academic performance. Willow thrives when she's not constantly defending herself against criticism and rejection. Taryn's attorney attempted cross-examination, suggesting that Nora's assessment was biased by Levi's influence over the therapy process. But the therapist had 2 years of detailed notes documenting Willow's emotional state, including sessions where the child had explicitly expressed fear of disappointing her mother and grandmother. She often said she wished she could be normal so her family would love her, Nora explained. That kind of conditional acceptance is profoundly damaging to a child's sense of self-worth. When Taryn took the stand in her own defense, her testimony revealed the depth of her disconnection from her daughter's actual needs. Willow has always been difficult, she said, as if this was a reasonable explanation for emotional neglect. She doesn't respond to normal parenting methods. She's obsessive, antisocial, and resistant to guidance. We were trying to help her learn appropriate behaviors. By appropriate behaviors, what do you mean? Lena asked during cross-examination. Normal social skills. Making eye contact, having conversations with adults, playing with children her own age instead of spending all her time alone with her art projects. Are you aware that your daughter is academically gifted and that her art has been recognized by multiple teachers and professionals? Art isn't a practical skill. She needs to learn how to function in the real world. The real world includes people with autism, doesn't it, Mrs. Granger? Taryn's pause was telling. I suppose, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to help her overcome her limitations. Do you view your daughter's autism as a limitation to be overcome? Yes. That single word sealed her fate. Judge Hendricks' expression shifted from neutral evaluation to obvious disapproval. In the gallery, Marlene shifted uncomfortably as she realized her daughter had just admitted to viewing her granddaughter's neurological differences as problems requiring correction. Your Honor, Lena said, the respondent has just confirmed that she views her daughter's autism as a defect rather than a difference. This attitude has created an environment where the child feels fundamentally unwanted unless she conforms to neurotypical expectations. Judge Hendricks reviewed the evidence for several minutes while the courtroom waited in tense silence. Finally, she looked up from her notes with the expression of someone who had reached an unpleasant but necessary decision. I've reviewed the video evidence, witness statements, and professional assessments. The physical violence demonstrated in the footage is concerning enough to warrant protective measures. However, the systematic emotional abuse documented by the child's therapist represents an even more serious threat to her well-being. She turned to address Taryn directly. Mrs. Granger, your testimony suggests that you view your daughter's autism as a problem to be solved rather than a trait to be supported. This attitude has created an environment where she feels rejected for being herself. But Your Honor, I'm not finished. The evidence shows that you've consistently prioritized your own comfort and convenience over your daughter's emotional needs. You've allowed family members to abuse her physically and emotionally without intervening or protecting her. Judge Hendricks consulted her notes before continuing. Therefore, I'm granting sole physical and legal custody of Willow Granger to her father, Levi Granger. Mrs. Granger, you'll be permitted supervised visitation twice per month, contingent on completing parenting classes focused on supporting children with autism. Taryn's face went white. You can't take my daughter away from me. I'm not taking her away from you. I'm protecting her from an environment that has consistently failed to meet her emotional needs. But Judge Hendricks wasn't finished. She turned to address Marlene, who had been sitting rigidly in the gallery. Mrs. Bridger, the video evidence shows you physically striking the child. Your behavior was witnessed by dozens of adults and represents a clear danger to the minor's safety. You are hereby prohibited from any contact with Willow Granger, supervised or otherwise, until further order of this court. Marlene stood with the outraged dignity of someone unaccustomed to being held accountable for her actions. "This is ridiculous. I was disciplining an undisciplined child. You are committing assault against a minor. If you violate this protective order, you will be arrested and prosecuted to the full extent of the law." The revelations came during the property settlement discussion 3 weeks later. In a conference room that smelled like leather furniture and broken dreams, Taryn's new attorney, she'd upgraded from the court-appointed defender to someone who charged actual money, had prepared for a typical divorce negotiation. Division of assets, spousal support calculations, child support determinations. The standard financial dissolution of a 13-year marriage. "Let's start with the marital residence," the attorney said, consulting his notes. "The house on Magnolia Street, purchased in 2015, current estimated value of $480,000. Lena smiled with the satisfaction of someone holding superior cards. "Actually, the house isn't marital property." She produced a folder containing the original purchase documents, mortgage applications, and property deed, all in Levi's name alone, purchased 6 months before his wedding with funds from his father's estate. South Carolina follows equitable distribution principles, but separate property acquired before marriage remains separate unless it's explicitly converted to joint ownership. Mr. Granger never added Mrs. Granger to the deed. Taryn stared at the documents as if they were written in a foreign language. "That's impossible. I've lived there for 13 years. I decorated it. I maintained it. Residence doesn't establish ownership," Lena explained with professional patience. "The property was purchased as separate property and remained separate property throughout the marriage, but the mortgage payments were made from Mr. Granger's income, which he earned through his separate business accounts." Taryn's attorney shuffled through his papers, looking for solid ground in what was becoming a financial sinkhole. "What about the joint savings accounts? Retirement funds? Investment portfolios?" "Let's discuss that," Lena said, producing another folder. Mr. Granger began converting joint assets to separate accounts approximately 18 months ago, following proper legal procedures and notification requirements. The documents showed a systematic separation of finances that had been occurring while Taryn focused on social obligations and family drama. Bank statements, investment transfers, account closures, all properly documented and legally executed. "I never received any notifications," Taryn protested. "All notifications were sent to your registered address and email accounts," Lena replied, showing certified mail receipts and email confirmations. "Your failure to read or respond to these communications doesn't invalidate the legal procedures." Levi sat quietly throughout the discussion, watching his soon-to-be ex-wife discover that her comfortable life had been built on foundations she'd never bothered to examine. He felt no satisfaction in her distress, but no sympathy either. She'd had 13 years to take an interest in their family's financial structure. "There must be something," Taryn's attorney said, grasping for any asset that might survive the dissolution. "Furniture, vehicles, personal property. Mrs. Granger is entitled to her personal belongings and the vehicle titled in her name," Lena confirmed. "A 2019 Honda Accord with approximately $12,000 remaining on the loan." "What about spousal support?" "She's been out of the workforce for years, focusing on home and family responsibilities. Mrs. Granger has a bachelor's degree in communications and no dependents requiring her care, since Mr. Granger has been awarded sole custody. She's fully capable of supporting herself through employment." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Taryn's attorney closing his files. In 15 minutes, 13 years of marriage had been reduced to a used car and whatever personal items she could fit in moving boxes. "How is this possible?" Taryn asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Levi spoke for the first time since the meeting began. "You built your life on my back. Now you'll learn what it's like to start from nothing." 6 months later, Levi stood in the kitchen of a modest 2-bedroom house in Asheville, North Carolina, watching his daughter arrange her art supplies on a table positioned to catch the morning light. The house was smaller than their Charleston home, but it felt larger, somehow less crowded with expectations and disappointments. "Dad, look what I finished last night," Willow said, carrying a canvas to show him. The painting was titled 55 Faces and depicted the guests from Marlene's retirement party in stark, honest detail. Each face was rendered with photographic precision, showing exactly what Willow had seen that night: embarrassment, discomfort, complicity, and indifference. 55 adults who had watched a child be hurt and chosen silence over intervention. It's powerful, sweetheart. Ms. Rodriguez says I can include it in the school's spring art show. She thinks it tells an important story about bystander responsibility. Willow's new school was a progressive arts academy that celebrated different learning styles instead of trying to correct them. Her teachers understood that autism wasn't a disorder to be cured, but a neurological difference to be supported. She'd made friends with other creative kids who appreciated her attention to detail and unique perspective. Levi had found work as a part-time engineering consultant while spending his remaining hours mentoring students at the local technical college. The pay was less than his previous position, but the stress was non-existent. He slept better, laughed more, discovered what life felt like when it wasn't constantly disrupted by people who demanded emotional energy without offering any in return. "Are you happy here?" he asked his daughter, though her improved grades and increased confidence had already answered the question. "Yes. People here understand that being different isn't the same as being wrong." Meanwhile, 200 miles south, the consequences of choices were playing out with mathematical precision. Taryn worked 2 jobs, now administrative assistant at insurance company during the day, restaurant hostess 3 nights a week. Her apartment was a 1-bedroom unit in a complex that attracted recent divorces and college students, furnished with pieces from discount stores and whatever she'd managed to salvage from her previous life. The social circle that had once defined her identity had evaporated along with her marriage. Former friends found excuses to avoid her calls. Invitations stopped arriving. Even her gym membership had lapsed when she couldn't afford the monthly fees she tried dating, but explaining why she'd lost custody of her daughter proved impossible without revealing the attitudes that had cost her everything. The few men who persisted past the awkward disclosures lost interest when they met her in person and discovered that her personality, without financial cushioning, was sharp, bitter, and chronically dissatisfied. That Fiona's situation was worse. The ethics investigation had expanded into federal charges involving misuse of campaign funds and violations of municipal contracting laws. Her political career was over. Her law license was suspended pending resolution of the criminal charges. Even her apartment had been seized as part of the asset forfeiture proceedings. She worked at a retail chain now, folding clothes and operating cash registers while waiting for her court date. The campaign volunteers who had once praised her political instincts avoided her in public. The donors who had funded her ambitions had moved on to more promising candidates. But Marlene's fall from grace was the most complete. The viral video had destroyed her carefully constructed social reputation. Church committees found reasons to replace her with younger volunteers. Charitable organizations discovered they could function perfectly well without her contributions. Even her longtime physician had transferred her care to a colleague, citing scheduling conflicts that everyone understood meant he didn't want to be associated with her. She spent most days alone in her house, curtains drawn against neighbors who whispered when she appeared in public. The retirement that was supposed to be filled with social obligations and community recognition had become a prison of isolation and regret. The irony wasn't lost on Levi. 3 women who had spent years criticizing his daughter for being antisocial had discovered what real social rejection felt like. He thought about them sometimes, usually when he was working in his new garage workshop or watching Willow paint in the evening light. He felt no satisfaction in their suffering, but no regret either. They made choices. Choices had consequences. The universe had simply restored balance to a system they'd knocked out of equilibrium. "Dad!" Willow's voice interrupted his thoughts. "I got a letter today." She handed him an envelope addressed in Taryn's handwriting. Inside was a brief note requesting permission for an additional supervised visit and expressing regret for past mistakes and judgment. Levi read the letter twice, then looked at his daughter. "What do you think?" Willow considered the question with her characteristic careful attention. "I think some people are sorry they got caught, but not sorry for what they did." Do you want to see her? Not yet. Maybe not ever. Is that okay? It's completely okay. You decide who gets access to your life, sweetheart. That's one of the most important things you can learn. He filed the letter with the others that had arrived over the past months. Apologies that focused on consequences rather than actions. Requests for forgiveness that came without admissions of wrongdoing. Promises of change from people who still didn't understand what they'd done wrong. That evening, while Willow worked on her homework, Levi sat on his back porch with a cup of coffee and watched the sun set behind the Blue Ridge Mountains. The air was clean and quiet, broken only by the sound of his daughter humming as she worked. He thought about revenge and how most people misunderstood its true nature. They imagined dramatic confrontations, angry words, explosive emotions. But real revenge wasn't rage. It was patience, precision, and knowing when to let silence speak louder than any slap ever could.